everybody, it's Justin with Purple Care and Lawn Therapy, and today I've got Dr. Kevin Ong on our show today. I'm very excited about this. Kevin, can you walk me through your background? I know that you started off in Pennsylvania. Just walk me through, your education and how you wound up here at A&M.
Sure. I did my undergraduate at Penn State, so Viva la Penn State. Got my degree in biology then. Didn't plan on going to grad school, but got a full ride scholarship to Temple University. So I used to have a good joke. I would tell folks I was a good kid because I would be at Temple 7 days a week, and I was trained as a protein biochemist over there. And I tell students today, don't do what I did in looking for a grad school. It was just by fruitious nature that I got a full ride scholarship to Temple, and I'm very thankful for that. After that, my journey took me to Clemson University in South Carolina. I was recruited there, and that was where I started getting into plant pathology. And I went down there to work with tobacco and studied different microorganisms that affects the health of plants. When I say tobacco, really it's a tobacco production system. So farmers that would use tobacco with corn or soybean or whatever in the rotation. And I did some work also with winter cover crops. So that was my background academically. And right before I got done with my PhD there, I was offered a job, an assistant professor job, and I started my career soon after as an assistant professor and extension specialist with Texas A&M AgriLab Extension, based in Dallas. So this is the Dallas Research and Extension Center up there on Coit Road.
Okay. And you, before all that, you said you grew up, where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Malaysia. I was born and raised in Malaysia, and my family had the opportunity of coming to the States by the time I was 17. So I've had graduated or done with high school in Malaysia. And that opportunity came because my grandmother had been brought to this country a number of years before that as a Christian missionary to work with some of the refugees that were brought here because of her language skills. And so while working for the church and eventually her becoming a U.S. Citizen, that allowed the rest of the family members to obtain their green card. And so we had that opportunity to come to the States. So I moved over to the States, to the Philadelphia area, with my family, mom and dad, and a younger brother, back in 1989 when I was 17.
Very good. And you went to Penn State for the wrestling, right? That's why you went there.
Well, I actually started my first year at a community college, believe it or not. And it was a blessing in disguise because I never realized what great value community college was in terms of getting some of your core classes out of the way.
Sure.
And finish out at Penn State.
Very good, very good. I am heavily involved in wrestling, and so I had to get my one stick in there. So, but I thought I'd get that in there. What you when you went through all the four different states? I mean, you went through Pennsylvania, you then went to South Carolina, you down in Texas. I said four, but I guess three. Yeah, because Temple's there too. And then down in Texas. What are some of the biggest changes as far as what you do? What are some of the biggest changes between, because those are three different microbi, you can call them microbiomes or even environments.
Yeah. This is the interesting part. When I went to Penn State, I knew, I was going to do something in science. So I was a biology major. But during the summer months of my junior year, well, actually my sophomore year and junior year, I was what you call an REU student, research and extension experiential student in organic chemistry. So I like to tell folks, hey, I make drugs legally during the summer, and I learned how to do some research, and it was quite enjoyable. But then I was a biology major, so I managed to get myself or volunteered in a lab to do some lab work in my senior year, and I did not plan on going to graduate school. And in fact, I had planned on going on staff with a parachurch group as a Christian missionary.
Interesting.
I did not know how to explain that to my folks, and so what I did was I went up to a bulletin board and picked off some of those ads that actually had expired deadlines and applied to those schools. And I did apply to Penn State, and I did pray to God, and I said, Lord, if you want me to go to grad school, let me get back to Penn State. And I got 3 acceptance and 1 rejection,
Hmm.
and the rejection was Penn State. And I got a full ride to Temple, so I didn't have an excuse but to go to grad school. And looking back at it all, I had a plan in my head. It didn't work out the first time. I had a second plan in my head, and I'm doing what I had envisioned, but my journey was just different of how I got there.
Sure.
So it's quite a humbling process.
I'm curious on you said tobacco in South Carolina.
Hmm.
Do they still have tobacco shares where they only allow so many people, only so many growers to grow? Because I know I lived in Kentucky for a while, and
Hmm.
that's the way it was all
Yeah.
tobacco shares. Like you couldn't grow tobacco just, hey, I'm going to grow some tobacco this year. No, you have to have tobacco shares to do that.
Justin, I'm glad you brought that up because that's one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing today in extension. When I was a graduate student, this was 96 to about 2001. That was the year of the tobacco settlements.
Hmm.
Um, I was a student with an experiment in a grower's field. And part of my job, and I was considered an extension graduate assistant, was to also help the growers produce crop and make a livelihood.
Hmm.
In those years that I was there, I saw the government cut the quota, cut the
Hmm.
shares down. And I saw a lot of folks that used to be able to make a living on 5 acres now suddenly could not.
Correct.
And so we saw folks basically having to leave the farm, going to work, and some of those got consolidated into larger scale. So once where you had a large number of growers or sharecroppers or whatnot, you end up with about 10 or 15 growers
Right.
having large acreage. And seeing that happen and realizing that some folks had to give up farming was shocking,
Right.
was kind of distressing to me, and it was something that I could not control.
Right.
Uh, but I still enjoyed the fact that I was, on those that I could help in terms of the growing part of it, whether it's tobacco, whatever else dealing with plant health.
Hmm.
To the great part about extension is you can see that return, you can see the impact of your work with the clientele that you have, and
Excellent.
that's what drew me to extension.
Is there much tobacco growth in Texas?
Absolutely not.
I didn't think so. I don't remember ever seeing tobacco
No.
crops. So,
And so the other question that I think a lot of folks ask is, how in the world did you get a degree, a PhD, where your primary focus or subject is tobacco, and then you get a job in a state where no tobacco is grown? Now, my first position in Dallas, I was hired as the urban plant pathologist.
hmm.
And I remember when I interviewed, I asked the department head then, I said, what do you mean, urban plant pathologist, in terms of crop responsibilities?
Hmm.
And the answer I got was turf, shade trees, and ornamentals.
Whereas I was gonna say, yeah, there's no crops in urban areas typically.
That's right. And well, those are crops if you want to think of
They
it
are.
that way.
Yes, they are.
And so I said, well, I can do that. And what I want to point out is, if you are a pathologist, a plant pathologist, you learn about things that make the plants sick. It should not matter what your subject is. If it's a tobacco, it's a tobacco plant. If it's a zinnia, it's an ornamental plant. If it's an oak tree, that's not a tobacco plant, but it's still a plant of some sort.
Hmm.
And so if you are a good pathologist, you should be able to understand those principles of pathology, principles of how a plant gets sick, when a plant gets sick, and apply it into those various situations.
Very good. What
So,
are some of when you were, and let's go back to Dallas for a moment, or just the Dallas Fort Worth
sure.
area. What were some of the main diseases that you saw in the crops as well? I love that. I'm gonna start telling everyone I'm gonna go check out my crops and I'm gonna just go on my lawn
Yeah.
or because I've got beautiful flower beds and gardens, but I'm going to say I'm going to check my crops from now on. I will start saying that.
Absolutely.
So
And hey, if you got a whole bunch of same thing growing there, you can say that that's my crop
I'm going
on
to.
that
I'm going
part.
to annoy my wife and say I'm going to go check the crops for
Yeah.
a moment. So
So,
she'll shake her head.
absolutely.
Anything I can get her. So
In,
yeah, what are some of the main diseases that you saw in urban? I mean, because it's a different world
it
compared
is a
to the
different
row
world,
crop.
and I want to roll back a little bit on that question.
Okay.
So earlier I told you that my higher ups told me that it was shade tree turf and ornamentals.
Okay.
That's what urban people care about.
Right.
That's not true. Urban folks care about every plant that they can get their hands on, whether it's a house plant, palm tree, fruit tree, vegetables. If they can grow it and they like it, they're gonna grow it.
You're
So
correct.
it's beyond any of those standard what we call ornamentals. But by far, in some place like Dallas Fort Worth area, you're gonna have a lot of lawns in housing developments for whatever reason. It seems like everybody have a love affair with lawns of some sort.
Hmm.
So you're gonna have grasses,
Hmm.
and I think most of the folks out there realize that the grass is gonna be a St. Augustine type grass. That's the predominant grass in the Dallas
Hmm.
Fort Worth area. But realize there's also Bermuda grass or zoysia grass. Um, Not as much centipede grass. That's more out in towards the east. But
Right.
those three, Bermuda grass, St. Augustine, and zoysia, are what you're going to typically see in the Dallas Fort Worth area.
We do. That's the main three grasses that we install, that we maintain. It absolutely is. And
Right.
I would actually say that as you head towards Fort Worth, it turns into Bermuda.
Yeah,
And I think it's because maybe it's, I don't know if it's drier. I mean, I think as you head east of Dallas, you start getting a little more rainfall. I mean, East Texas gets a lot more moisture than we
that's
do. And it's
correct.
not that far away.
That's
I mean, just
correct.
simply an hour away gets a lot more water, a lot more moisture. But we start seeing Bermuda. Obviously, in your shade areas, Bermuda does not pan out,
Yes.
does not do well. But if it's because Fort Worth is also a very growing area, the trees are not mature. We have mature areas of Fort
Right.
Worth, but it's also booming. And so where there's shade, we've got to grow St. Augustine and zoysia. But where there's a lot of full sun, which we have a lot of, like we have large areas of full sun, it's going to be Bermuda dominant. But as we head towards the east, it goes back to St. Augustine, just like you said.
So here's one thing I want to throw on, just putting my little head on as a horticulturist, right?
Please do.
More than just a plant pathologist. You talk about St. Augustine being good in shade, but realize that's a grass. There are
It's
going to be limitations on that, but along that same lines, there are a lot of other plants that can be used as ground cover.
We agree.
Uh,
We're in
uh,
agreement.
and it's not going to work at every place, even in the Dallas Fort Worth area.
Correct.
It just takes a little bit of, I don't know, experimentation to figure out what works and what not. And in some places, the good old English ivy works great.
Mhm.
Some places, the what is it, the jasmine, Asian jasmine
Asian
works
jasmine works
great.
great. Yeah,
And
DFW, Asian jasmine,
um,
frog fruit. We're seeing stuff like frog fruit, which a lot of people
oh
don't.
wow,
I mean, it is
yeah,
a ground
it,
cover. I'm in agreement. One of the lines that I use on clients constantly is stop putting grass where grass doesn't want to grow.
yep,
And that everyone says, well, St. Augustine or zoysia, they're shade grasses. I'm like, no, 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 they're not. They're shade tolerant.
that's
And that's
correct.
where they're
Yeah,
shade tolerant. I said, so stop. There's a reason why the grass is dying underneath your tree. It's a phenomenal area to landscape. I said, you should be putting, that's where you can put whatever, your irises. That's where you can be putting ferns. I mean, there's
yeah.
gorgeous landscape plants that actually will really enhance the beauty of your overall property. It's not a monoculture anymore, and just simply by making turning them into beds, I absolutely am in agreement with you there. Too many people just want grass. I'm like, you don't want just grass.
Well, let me give you a tidbit to you and your listeners on disease and
Okay.
and, and why disease happen.
Hmm.
And maybe I can put this simply that folks can understand. Just realize this. The plants that are going to get sick are usually ones that are stressed.
Hmm.
And you can put that in, using a human analogy. If you feel stress and a rundown and get on a plane versus somebody who goes in, had a good night's sleep and fresh and get on a plane, and as that plane is flying, you hear some hacking coughs in that plane, guess who's going to get sick
Right.
or with the highest risk of getting sick is the person who's run down. And that's same and true with plants as well. If you put plants where they're not supposed to be, they're going to be stressed.
Hmm.
If you put plants that are not supposed to grow here, it's going to be stressed. If you don't treat the plant right, it's going to be stressed. Doesn't mean that it's going to get sick, but it's more likely to get sick than something that is happy. So
I agree.
bear that in mind.
Yes, I agree. I tell people that, so when it's what, you know, what you said earlier is true, is that people, notice they want to know all their plants to be healthy. But what I've noticed is people want us when things are stressed out. Like they'll see our value in what we did to the soil and what we did to all the things we do to make the plants healthy. You'll notice when it's stressed out, and you'll look at the neighbor's yard where it's the same stress, maybe possibly a lot too much water, too little water, too much
Mm-hmm.
shade. And that's where you're going to notice. I always tell people, when times are tough, that's where you're going to notice the difference between, I think, what we do and other people do. If that makes sense, is because we're trying to figure out the stresses. We're trying to figure it out,
Absolutely.
and if we can master that, your lawn's going to make, because it's your lawn looks great in May. Everyone's does almost, but it's when it goes after the winter. Like, does it
That's
make it through
right.
that winter
Yep.
kill? Did you get a fungus in late fall and then go into that winter and then the winter kill ended it all?
Yep.
If those are all stresses that entered your yard, it's not, it happens. People wake up in the springtime and there's no, what happened to my grass? And
Right.
I'm like, it actually happened in the fall.
Exactly. And that's, and you brought up something that's a lot of fun in terms of trying to educate folks. So the other position that I have is the director of Texas Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab,
Hmm.
and we do get homeowners who call us with those type of questions, wanting to know what's wrong, but they don't like our answers when we tell them, you know, this what you're seeing was something that probably happened 6 months ago or
Correct.
2 years ago, and it's a hard concept to grasp, to realize that sometimes an onset of a disease or that infection could have happened some lengthy period
Yeah.
prior to symptoms showing up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's kind of like Alzheimer's or dementia
yeah.
in us. Like, a lot of people think it just shows up. Like, oh, just show.
Hmm.
No, it started 30 years
Right.
ago.
Right.
We didn't know it, and I think that's true. Where it started usually, I see the biggest death that I see is over the winter, and
Mm.
they blame it on the cold. Or some people call us and say, well, it wasn't even that cold this year. I'm like, it was actually started in the fall, and you thought your grass went dormant early. It was actually a fungal issue, or there was an issue then, and then the winter just put it out of its misery is all it did. And then in the spring it looks terrible, or it's coming out late.
Mm.
But I wanted to ask this question, and you're gonna make me an honest person or a liar here, but I typically tell people that there is a fungus in St. Augustine 24/7. It doesn't matter, just when it decides to rear its ugly head. Is that a true statement?
That is almost a true statement,
Okay,
and I'll
straighten me
I'll,
out.
I'll explain. There are always going to be microbes in the soil environment,
Hmm.
and on grasses,
Hmm.
you are going to have some microbes on there. Yes, there's likely going to be one or more fungi
Hmm.
on that grass roots or stolons. They could be pathogenic, they could be saprophytic, meaning is they could potentially attack the plant,
Hmm.
or they could be one that is just using the plant as a hose, but they actually feed on detritus or break down products from around. Now, what you're referring to are what we call facultative pathogens.
Hmm.
So those that can actually live on other things, but if given the right food source or opportunity, that they would take advantage of it and attack the plant. Yes, in many places, I think in Texas, especially in urban areas, the most predominant, I would say, fungi that you can find almost anywhere is the take-all patch fungus,
Take all root ground.
Gommonomyces graminis.
Yeah.
Um, and so we get the question is, if we look for that in the soil, can we treat for it? That's a very hard question to answer correctly, because it is an inhabitant of the soil
Hmm.
naturally. It's not uniformly distributed, but it's there. You put out a weak or weakened grass, it has the opportunity, depending on how aggressive it is, to attack it and cause disease. Um, a lot of times, you might have other reasons for grass becoming less healthy.
Hmm.
Whether it's heat, whether it's lack of water, or whether it's poor nutrition or imbalanced nutrition. What happens is the plant gets stressed, and then you have this opportunistic pathogen come in.
Yes.
And then the question comes, what killed the plant? Well, some people might say the fungus killed the plant. Yeah, you could say that. The fungus did kill the plant. So let me tell you a story, right? So if you have a human, using a human, who has suffered various different allergies and ailments over the years, and then they are about have cancer or whatever, and said you only have 2 weeks to live, but they got killed by a drunk driver. Who killed
Right.
that person? Well, you would say it's a drunk driver, but then you realize that the person's health had been affected tremendously even before that. It's not a great example, but I think it try and provide the fact that there's in the case of the example with Gomanomyces and the stress grass, that's more of a direct correlation there, where you got a grass that's not healthy becoming a target for the pathogen.
I'm not going to get, this is not a political question, I promise, but we saw that with COVID. We did. We saw that we
Yeah.
saw that, I'm not going to, it's not a political question, it just, but we saw it where somebody maybe had another ailment and they got COVID and it was
And
over for
and
them,
and
unfortunately.
that's with statistics. Is it correlation? Is it direct effect? And that's not easy questions to answer.
Very difficult.
As a scientist, all you can do is you go by the data.
Hmm.
So and I understand what you mean by the politics are politicizing that at all, but ultimately, I think for somebody to be able to look at it wisely is to say, let's look at the data and what it says. And then you are going to have differing opinions
Correct.
about how to deal with it.
The
That's what
narrative.
you run
The
into.
narrative.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
So and
What?
and just to go on with that, what we try to do with extension, not just us in plant pathology, the information that we put out there, and I think you use and some of your listeners might have used through AgriLife Extension.
Mhm.
We try our best to put scientific based information out there, and we try to provide reasonable recommendations based on that, and hopefully we hope that people would realize, as we get new information, recommendations can change. So always, look for the most up to date information, and hopefully when you see the name or the word extension in there, there is some confidence that we are trying our best to provide scientific based information.
We reference you all the
Yeah,
time. I always tell people, I'm like, you really should try to go to A&M,
yeah,
research them. They're the experts. I mean, I always kind of, we jokingly say they're the Bible when it comes to plants. So I mean, no disrespect towards
yeah.
anybody, but that's what we always say. I'm like, go to A&M. And a lot of what I do and what we practice is based on what I've read through your materials, believe it or not.
Cool.
So, and I can't, I can't get enough of it, but I also can't get it all. I mean, like
Yeah.
there's so much information out there that's amazing that you guys put out. Some simple questions that maybe like that your average homeowner would maybe like to find out why. But I've pulled literally hundreds and hundreds of soil samples sent to you guys. You guys, 99.9% of those say take all root out. It doesn't matter. The grass could be healthy. It could be. It doesn't matter. Just explain why is that? Like why do they seem to always say that no matter what?
So that's a great one with that St. Augustine grass or
Hmm.
type situation, and that happens with Bermuda grass too.
It does. It's
Because by the
bizarre.
time a homeowner notices the damage,
Hmm.
those are symptoms more than likely created by an infection from that fungus.
Hmm.
So if you take something like that and send it in, there's a very good chance we'll find it. If you have something happening while it's transitioning. You take a sample. Like I said before, this fungus is an inhabitant of the soil. It's likely going to be there. So that our diagnosticians will try and see if there are structures that are embedded in the stolon itself. So in other words, it has grown in, it has infected, and it's actually producing certain structures that tell us that it's established there. So
Mhm.
which give us a sense that it has taken, or there has been a bit of time that have occurred. So it is possible that that fungus actually killed that grass. Now, going back to the example that I told you earlier, you got a stress plant, a plant that's almost dying. It's an opportunity. It's free food for that fungus.
Mhm.
You send that sample in, all we're gonna find is Gommonomyces graminis.
Yeah.
Diagnostician has to make a call, and we can only report what we see. The unfortunate thing is we don't have a third eye to see the things that happen prior to that infection or what may have been contributed to that infection process. So even though it comes back as take all patch, I think that should be always a little flag to set, hey, evaluate what had made your grass weaken to the point that you have this fungus attacking it.
Mhm.
Now, bear in mind that is majority of the cases. In rare situations, we have strains of Gommonomyces that are absolutely aggressive. I remember when I was in Dallas, we had a Dallas County Master Gardener and had a lawn that had take all patch. And we threw everything except the kitchen sink at it over a period of, I think, 3 or 4 years and could not stop it.
Hmm.
And it was an interesting one. We got a culture of it, and so I got real excited because we knew that this culture, this fungus that we isolated, was not susceptible to any of the standard pesticides that we use.
Mhm.
So it was like, whoa, I got a super killer here. But the funniest thing was it didn't survive very well on an agar plate.
Hmm. Interesting.
And
And you
and
haven't
that,
seen it since?
well, we lost the culture,
Right.
and he finally gave up with St. Augustine grass and grew something else.
Right.
So
I've seen I'm gonna ask, but the best that I've when people we walk into lawns constantly or landscapes where they it's pretty obvious that they've had some kind of fungal damage and we do a soil sample and people are like, what do you do? The best results I've got, and you can tell me this is a good or a bad way, but the best results I've got is when I actually bring in premium soil and I fix the soil. In particular, if I crank up the acidic value. If I
mhm,
crank up the acidic value, which I do. That's what I do. I mean, by adding coffee grounds
right,
or whatever, and I lower that pH. If I can lower that pH, it seems to really set it back tremendously. And I'm not saying that that's gone. The pathogen is still in the soil. I think it just isn't active. And
absolutely,
is that am
yep.
I doing that
No,
correctly?
no, you are. And here I'll give you the biological reason why. And this
Okay,
is what pathologists do,
there we
is
go.
trying to understand, what makes that pathogen tick.
Hmm.
You're right. Comanomyces love alkaline conditions.
Hmm.
They're not a huge problem in East Texas,
No.
but anything west of I-45 or
Hmm.
75 is where you see the problems getting magnified. They love alkaline. So if you can do things to alter the soil chemistry,
Hmm.
the pH to be more acidic,
Hmm.
it will help with the what I would call the infection process or lack of or
Hmm.
prevent that. Here's the problem. Soil environment is a wonderful chemical buffer. You can throw a bunch of sulfur on it to acidify it,
Correct.
but within a week, it will go back to that pH 8.82 or whatever in the Dallas Fort Worth
Even
area.
9. It's
Exactly.
crazy.
So it's really hard to acidify. So some strategies to do that is like you said, you come in with either new soil with some kind of a blend, and in fact, one of the more successful, not foolproof, but successful deterrent is when you resaw it, you would come in and put, what is it, peat moss and till that in, or use high quality compost
Hmm.
with organic material, because what you're trying to do is increase the pH, but also with good organic material, you're increasing the diversity of the microbes that may be present.
Yeah.
And we have a wonderful example of that, pretty morbid, but a wonderful example of that when Katrina happened.
Hmm.
Think about New Orleans, right? At any time of the year, things are in balance. But when Katrina happened and the floodwaters came up, you saw a lot of bad things happen because bad people showed up, because the cops were gone.
Hmm.
So if you want to put that same analogy in that soul thing, you're creating an environment which creates some sort of balance. And with that diversity of microbes, you are keeping the bad microbes suppressed.
Right.
And obviously, when you have a shift, like a pH shift to more alkaline, then that balance is slightly challenged. And so you can have bad things happen. So that's one way of looking at that infection process.
Very good.
So
I tell people this too, is that I think the average homeowner consumer, they think, well, because we stress putting down peat moss constantly, especially if you've got a St. Augustine or a zoysia. I don't think it's as necessary in Bermuda. It's good either way. It's good. I don't care if you, no matter what soil you put it down in the Dallas Fort Worth, it's always, I think, it's a very low cost thing to do that is very effective. But I've found much more effect in zoysia and St. Augustine. But what they don't quite understand is this is something you need to do repeatedly. This is not like, hey,
that's correct. Yeah,
because, and what I've explained to people is, and I need your help on clarifying, is that our water pH is sky high. Great for you and I for drinking, healthy for our stomachs, right? But I don't think our pH, I can drop it, but it's constantly going to go back up.
it's
It's,
not so much just the water. Like I mentioned to you earlier, the soil environment is a great buffer system.
hmm.
So it'll always go back to what we call the climax point.
Okay.
So if it's 8.5, you can change it to like a 6. But
Hmm.
guess what? 3, 4 days later, it'll go back to an
It sure
8.
does.
And that's the beauty of the soil as a buffer system.
Hmm.
So going back to the treatments or the management approach, whether it's using high quality compost or peat moss, what you're trying to protect is not that whole soil, but just the strata where the roots are.
Hmm.
Because guess what? Take all fungus, Gommonomyces, attacks through the roots, the crown. So if you get that area pH lower in that area, basically that's where you need to deter the pathogen.
Sure.
So what that means? Well, for some people, that may be top dressing with good quality compost once a year, and
Hmm.
that may be sufficient. That's not the case in a lot of places. Sometimes you may have to either put peat moss or do something like that 2 times, 3 times a year. But then couple that with using an acidifying type fertilizer
Yeah.
to try and at least maintain some um, acidity in that soil
Yeah.
to create that non-conducive environment, at least in that root layer. So
Yeah.
probably that first 2 inches.
I agree.
Yeah.
I bet you that what I'm going to say next is probably in 3 or 4 different podcasts, and it's something that I probably say more than anything else. And I get asked, "Hey, do you have any silver bullets?" Or, "Hey, if I could only do one thing, what would it be?" And I'm like, if you're only going to do one thing, which you shouldn't, by the way, but if you only had one thing, my answer is always top dress. It's not a fertilizer. It's not a pest control. It's not a weed control. It is top dress your lawn. That, because if I can change your soil, then I can change. I mean, then my everything else is going to work better. My fertilizers, I don't have to use much. I don't have to use much weed control. And so I always tell people, the number one thing you can do to your yard is not run down to a company and go, "Hey, I want weed control and fertilization." Yes, those are great. We do that, but it's top dressing, and I cannot stress it enough. And that we get people that do, I would say we probably put out a couple thousand yards of soil a year. So I know we're doing the right thing for the environment, but I can't. I still. I mean, it's not enough. I'm like, I wish more people would listen and do that. I don't know if you agree with those statements, but um,
That has to be a qualified statement because top dressing is a great approach.
mhm.
I call it the moderation approach, and I'll explain to you why that is.
Excellent.
But at the same time, you got to keep in mind top dressing is not going to work on everyone
Hmm.
because every little piece of land is a microcosm of
Hmm.
an environment. So what might work on one side may not work on your neighbor's side.
Hmm.
So you'll have to experiment with whether what materials you use as the top dressing.
Right. I agree.
Okay. And then in terms of top dressing, I call it the moderation approach because when you think about it, the material in the top dress, whether it's top dress soil or whatever, it's going to act like a mild fertilizer. It's going to probably put an input of increased organic matter,
Hmm.
but at a level much less than what you would find in a synthetic product.
Hmm.
It would also introduce or amend that soils with a variety of microorganisms that might be residing in the top dress, but not as much as if you're just culturing that and dumping it on. So I call it the moderation approach, and it's a good way to the middle ground, so to speak, and it's a good way for many places to gain some benefit of any one of those what I call mode of actions.
Okay. Right. I know, like, what I try, like, we all know the phosphorus is loaded in our soil here. We have tons of phosphorus, but the plants typically don't have access to it. And yet phosphorus is very important in the root growth, correct? I mean, in
Yeah.
root growth and getting strong, healthy roots. And I think just it gets the pH correct to where it activates the phosphorus that's already in the soil because it was not,
Yeah.
it's there.
I think the correct term more is to get it into a form that is available to the plant or released
That's what I'm
from
looking for. Yes, yes.
the clay particles. So that's a whole area, a whole other area that there are actually folks that work on it called soil chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And the understanding that, you change one thing, you are going to affect a bunch of other things in that soil and environment in terms of what's released, what's not, what's held back. In the Dallas Fort Worth area, the questions that we get from there has to do with azaleas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my azalea's yellow. Well, it's iron deficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so you say it means that I have to put iron in the soil. You could try that, but guess what? Because the soils are alkaline, it's going to tie up the iron. You could do a soil test on those soils, and it'll come back loaded with iron, but it's not in a form that's available to the plant.
Correct.
So that's one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Chemistry play a big role in the health of the plant.
We're in agreement
Yeah.
there. Yeah, I always tell people once you've gone to kind of like Georgia and saw the azaleas there, you don't want the ones in Texas. I think azaleas are beautiful. They're a gorgeous plant, but I really try to stress people that unless you're coming from East Texas, I'm not a big fan of them in Dallas Fort Worth. I know that may get people running the opposite direction of me because that people love them, but they just don't do well. I mean, they will do well for a year or two. But there's gonna be a year they're gonna fail you.
So I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to say this probably pretty bluntly. If you want to grow azaleas in the Dallas Fort Worth area, be prepared to spend a lot of money every year, either changing or amending the soil to keep it acidic.
Correct.
Sometimes it might be cheaper just to move to East Texas, east of Tyler, to get those good azaleas.
Yeah, we're in agreement.
So
I don't like to tell people
yeah,
no, but I have to. I'm like, let's listen. I can put these plants in, but they're just not going to thrive. And that's what I like durable plants, which is actually one of my next questions. Is that we're gonna get off the soil for a second, but I know that you have a strong background in pathology, but in particular in fruit trees. Is that correct?
yeah. So one of my responsibilities now, as an extension specialist, is in ornamentals and tree fruit.
Mm-hmm.
So around Texas, it's gonna be mostly stone fruit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's your peaches, your apricots, your nectarines.
Okay. Very good. I get asked this question a lot,
Mm.
and I'd like to know it from your point of view as well. But well, I personally like very durable plants. Like, for example, I love Vitex trees. Why?
Mm.
they're bulletproof. I mean, you can too much heat, no heat. I mean, too much sun, no sun. Water, no water. They just seem to
Correct.
produce. So I like durable things. Why? I think that's what you want here in Texas. We have a very rough environment. It's very volatile. We have extreme heats, extreme cold.
Yep.
We have extreme temperatures, water, moisture. It could be we get 4 inches in an hour. We get no rain for 3 months. I mean, it's very difficult to grow. So I like things that can survive,
Yeah.
all of those conditions, which is not every plant. So that being said, what fruit trees do you think are most durable, in particular for Dallas Fort Worth? Because I mean that Houston area is a whole different animal than what we have. And so, what do you think in Dallas Fort Worth? If somebody wanted to plant fruit trees in their backyard, what would you recommend?
Look at persimmons.
Hmm.
Look at pomegranates.
Okay.
Uh, I know that there are a lot of people that want to grow some form of citrus
Hmm.
or peaches. Um, if you are thinking about peaches, make sure that you have soils that are well drained.
Hmm.
The unfortunate thing about the Dallas Fort Worth area is most part of Dallas Fort Worth area has that black gumbo soil which hangs on to water real tightly. Peaches do not like those.
Hmm.
Um, so I think there are some wonderful fruit trees that could be used in those areas. And when I say persimmons, the Asian persimmons,
I was going to say which variety of
yeah,
persimmon because there's like the ones up in Oklahoma.
right.
Those are a different variety than what I think you're
So
talking about.
yeah, so what I'm referring to are the Asian persimmons.
Hmm.
So there are several of them. Like Fuyu is probably the most famous one,
Hmm.
but those persimmon trees are pretty hardy,
Okay.
and and the American persimmons, which you can find natively, they would produce persimmons that are really small. Um,
Yes, I have them in Oklahoma. I've got
and
my, yeah.
right, and that should also tell you something because those trees are pretty durable. So
They are, and they're very tall. They're way taller than I thought.
right.
So the
So
ones
the Asian
are
persimmons are
ornamental.
not going to be that tall.
Okay, good.
They make great little shade trees. So
Okay.
most of them are not going to be over, I would say, 20 feet or
So
so.
it's in the ornamental range then,
It's
for
on the
sure.
ornamental mid tree
Mid, yeah.
range,
Okay.
uh, and and uh, and it produces great color in the fall.
Hmm.
Depending on the variety, and the fruit. Basically, you want to pick them at the best sweetness after the first frost. So the leaves could drop, and all you see is this orange-looking fruit. It looks like the Christmas tree from
Yeah.
what is it, Charlie Brown?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, and that's a good one. Pomegranates. I think some folks have had success growing pomegranates. The habit is a little bit like vitex. It can be bushy,
Hmm.
but that's also tree form.
Right.
And
I've
that's
seen
not a
that tree
lot.
do well, but I haven't seen it produce as much fruit as I'd like in DFW.
And that's something has to do with nutrition.
Okay.
And hopefully, uh, when you get a chance to talk with a horticulturist,
Hmm.
they might be able to help you with some of that. And again, that goes back to what's in the soil and what's available. Um, what worked for me here in my own backyard, I actually have an Asian jujube
Okay.
plant, and apparently, what I did not realize is this plants. There are people that have grown this for years in Texas,
Hmm.
and so
I don't see it a lot.
it not so much in the urban areas. What I thought was funny was I would go out on a ranch and I'm like, that's a jujube tree. That's a big jujube tree because it would be 60 feet or whatever.
Mhm.
How long has that been here? And found out that, it's a 40-year-old, 50-year-old tree or so. So that's a big tree. And,
What
and,
type of
and
fruit is that?
it depends on the varieties, but usually it's going to be probably, I would say, um, 2 or 3 inches in length, maybe about an inch in diameter.
Hmm.
And it tastes a little bit like a cross between a pear and a guava, I guess.
Sounds good.
So, those are some of the little trees or big trees that you can plant. Um,
Are they long lived?
the persimmon, well,
The persimmon
define
are, yeah.
long.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess like, longer than your Bradford pears.
Oh, yes, definitely.
So,
And the beauty about, I think, the persimmon too is you can prune it to make it, keep it the shape
Hmm.
that's manageable that you want. I know some folks like to top it, so you keep it at a manageable height so they don't have to climb
Sure.
to get to the fruit. And so it's a pretty versatile plant. Um, I know of some places in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that folks have had success growing peaches
Hmm.
and apples.
Hmm.
Now, those two plants I would not really recommend for that area, just because it's not well suited. But in a sort of a backyard environment, that's already an artificial environment anyway. But also, we do have a couple of diseases here that are common that could actually destroy those trees or attack those trees. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I know that I've actually seen phenomenal peach trees
yeah,
in Dallas Fort Worth, but they're not everywhere. I mean,
no.
that's like, so I realize that that is the right spot for that particular tree.
And the other thing too is to keep in mind is peaches tend to prefer acidic soils.
Hmm.
So where you tend to find some of them doing better, probably in the Dallas Fort Worth area, is probably up north along the what lake is that? Is it Gray Roberts or something? That
Hmm.
there are fingers in there with sandier soils, deeper, well drained
Hmm.
soils that are acidic, and those are some areas where we would see good peaches.
Yep. I've also seen it in like some of the older communities
Mhm.
where they probably still have the topsoil from, I mean, like they didn't, because right now when you build houses, all the topsoil is
Yes.
gone.
Yes.
So if I go into the TCU area of Fort
Hmm.
Worth, let's say, sorry to mention TCU in a A&M building, but
Well, you're wearing purple, right?
I get accused of that quite often, but it's not true. But I get accused of that quite often. So, but I know that in the TCU area, there's some older homes that have been there a long time, and that topsoil there is fantastic. Like when I pull soil
Hmm.
samples there, it is completely different than even 2 miles away. Just simply a mile or two down the road, completely different. And I think it's because again, I'm gonna guess when they built that house, they didn't remove any of the topsoil, and it's even the coloring of the soil there is different. It's pretty interesting.
You brought up another thing. Sometimes that soil there is natural,
Hmm.
but also got to remember that over the years, somehow that soil has been regenerated in some way. So whoever had been there or whatever did something that maintained at least some health in that soil.
Interesting.
So
I wonder what they were doing because
yeah,
there's certain areas, there's fingers throughout Fort Worth
yeah,
that the soil is just fantastic. I'm like, what, and but it's
yeah.
not just one person's yard. It's kind of like the whole strip
A
through there.
sliver of it,
It
and
is.
the
It's
soil
very,
profile
very
is
different.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I tell people there's a reason why they're not struggling with this, or there's a reason why that peach tree. Because people are like, I want that in my house. I'm like,
Uh,
uh,
Now,
I wouldn't
one more
believe it.
thing I almost forgot: citrus.
Hmm.
If folks in Dallas want to grow citrus,
Hmm.
I would always recommend you find a cold tolerant variety and put it in a pot
Okay.
and bring it in the winter months, or at least grow it in some kind of a protected house, because it might survive 1 or 2 winters.
Hmm.
I realize that in a city like that, which with as much concrete, you do get the heat sink
Hmm.
effect, but there are going to be a year or two that you would get extreme cold that would just wipe it out.
Yeah, I have yet to see a single lemon or lime tree make it. Now I'm not.
Mm.
If somebody's got one out there, fantastic. I'd love to see it. But if you're leaving it out on the ground, I'm not talking about you bringing it in the winter.
Right.
But I've yet to see one make it past year five. I mean, maybe they'll make it a year.
Yep.
Maybe they typically don't even make it more than two or three. But five, I haven't yet to see one, and it just they don't produce well either. Just there's many things they don't do. You're right. It's got to be
Yeah.
brought in. So I think there's several plants like that. But I also think having a small little greenhouse on your property is kind of neat. It's kind of a neat thing
If
to
you
do.
have the space and able to do that, absolutely is a. And if you love plants, it's a great way
Yeah,
to have a collection of plants.
it is because the plants you have are going to be very unique because no one else can grow them unless they're bringing them in. So
Right.
it's kind of neat to pull out some of these trees out of the greenhouse that no one else is going
Yeah.
to have in the neighborhood, but you've got them because you protected them over the winter. I think they're kind of worth it. I've noticed a lot of people are starting to like hook them up on wheels, like they'll put a big pot like on a roller
Yeah.
and then roll it in. I mean, they've kind of got it sophisticated to where it's not as much work, but yeah.
And the one thing that this is the pathology side again coming
Hmm.
out is if you do have a greenhouse or something like that, make sure you do sanitize and keep it clean.
Hmm.
Because if you keep it closed in an environment like that over the winter and it's warm in there and there's a pathogen or whatever, you're just going to propagate the
Oh,
pathogen
you've
as
got a
well.
large petri dish, don't you?
Exactly.
Hmm.
And one thing that's nice about us in Texas is if you move the plants out in the summer, close it up, and guess what? You've got an oven right in there, and
Right.
that will help you sanitize that
That'll bake
that
it,
little facility.
cook
Yeah,
it out.
bake it.
Very good.
Yeah,
Kind of like the windrows in soil. You got to let it cook. You got to
exactly.
let it
Yeah.
cook. So we, it's interesting. Your colleague, Dr. Wanbo, we talked a lot about fungi and funguses, and I noticed that I'm not going to mention the manufacturer, but there's a manufacturer in Dallas Fort Worth. Actually, they're all over Texas, but they're up in Fort Worth as well, and they use a mushroom compost.
Hmm.
I've noticed that their soil does not get hot enough in their windrows and their compost piles to cook everything out, and they will have it. And I've noticed that they will have issues with that. Like we've used their soil, I'm like, never again. I don't know if you've seen that with some of the where it has to get hot inside that compost heap. Otherwise, those.
So years ago, you know, I had worked with a lot of composting type approaches
Hmm.
as a an approach to what we call methyl bromide replacement.
Hmm.
So methyl bromide is a fumigant, and it's been banned
Hmm.
in most places and whatnot. And so the federal government, EPA specifically, was looking for alternatives. So one of it was that composting facility, and I think there are several cities in the Dallas-Fort Worth areas that actually uh, have composting facilities. One that I did work with years ago was Plano.
Hmm.
Now, whenever you do composting, this is true whether it's done commercially or at home, is realize in a compost you get a pile, and what you're relying on is the decomposition of material, and in that decomposition, you're going to have heat generated,
Hmm.
and so the heat is going to be what I would call pasteurizing heat. It's not sterilizing heat; it's pasteurizing heat.
Hmm.
I think in excess of 180 degrees Fahrenheit or
Hmm.
so, but it is not uniform over the entire pile. So I used to get questions from homeowners saying that, well, I got this disease plant. Can I throw it in the compost? I said, yeah, absolutely, because it will reduce the population of the pathogen because you're gonna break it down.
Right.
Then I get the question, but I want to make sure that I can guarantee that I totally kill all the pathogen. Then I look at them and I said, well, how confident are you in your composting ability? Because what that means is, do you have the time to turn it around, make sure that every part of it at some point did reach that 180 and that you have done it enough that you have absolutely eradicate the pathogen? The answer to that is you'll never get it 100% eradicated,
No. No.
but you can get it suppressed. Now, at a commercial place, I think it used to be there was certifications and all that there are certain processes with the windrow and all that.
Hmm.
And so there's temperature monitoring and the number of times that it's done to ensure at least some uniformity in the product and the cleanliness, I would call it cleanliness of the
Hmm.
product. And there's again some proprietary process with that. And I think as you have found out, certain products doesn't meet your standard.
Right.
It may meet some other person's standard, but for your purposes, it didn't
It
meet
did
yours.
not. No.
And that's what I think listeners need to understand too. There are a lot of different products out there that are the same thing. They may not all work the same way for you.
Right.
Find what works for you, stick to it until it doesn't, then find what else works for you.
Yeah.
So,
It's similar to the human body, right? And what you have to got to find what works for you, and
yeah, absolutely.
we're all different. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting because I noticed the ones that used any animal manure at all, cow manure, chicken manure, all those, that cranked up the octane and that cranked up the heat significantly. So I
Mhm.
noticed that when we mixed in a little bit of manure, that really helped I mean, that got us to the degree level that we wanted quicker and better. Just it seemed like it got a lot hotter than some of your other compost did. So I think we've had phenomenal success with coffee, believe it or not, in some of the soils, which is very acidic. Interesting. Been a difference too in like the cold pressed coffee versus the roasted coffee.
You
Very
know, there's a
interesting.
biological and scientific explanation to all that is, cold press,
Hmm.
hard press or drip or whatever it
Right.
is like what was taken out of the bean and what was left in the bean.
Hmm.
And how does that interact with that gamush
Hmm.
or that mixture that you're making?
Yep.
So, yeah, those are all what I would call, in the scientific term, a variable
Yeah.
to create that product.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes if you're lucky, you hit on a product that works in almost everywhere.
Right.
But rarely have I seen a product that would work at every place.
It's very difficult. I agree with you, and I think and it's a lot of people want a one fits all answer.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. I love one of the bane of my lawn existence is well, my neighbor can do that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it literally is different. I'm like, it's literally like, well, they're on the east, they're getting east sun, you're getting west sun. I mean, like just literally across the street,
Right.
they get morning sun coming in and you get the afternoon sun on the backside. I mean, that's the backside because the street's open. You're getting two different suns completely changed. That's a different biome altogether. That western sun is a killer. It is amazingly
Yeah.
crazy
The
hot.
heat. Yeah.
And so I explain to people that, but like you just said, like it's a lot of people want that one answer fits all. You really have to. There's more science to this, and I'd love to ask. That's what I'm going. There's more science to this than people understand. It's not just dirt.
But there's also the other component, art.
Hmm.
You need to have the science to understand what's happening.
Hmm.
You need the art to know how to use the science.
Sure.
So,
Very
yeah.
good. What go back to DFW when you were there again? I know we kind of went over some of the turf
Yeah.
diseases, but what were some of the other diseases that you saw that were just very prevalent that really caused a lot of
So,
havoc?
I was there between 2002 and 2008, and that was when we start to see rose rosette becoming more and more of a
Hmm.
problem. At that time, the Fort Worth Botanic Gardens had that rose garden that they managed it really well, but we saw a lot of disease starting to show up in the North Richland Hill areas,
Hmm.
especially there, but it was all over the Dallas Fort Worth area. And that was one during that time there were people that suspected it was a virus,
Hmm.
but it wasn't until 2012 that there was a scientific paper out of a student from a lab in Arkansas, actually a virology lab, that actually showed or demonstrated that the pathogen that causes rose rosette disease was actually a virus.
Hmm.
So we had worked on assumption then, and in terms of diagnosis, um, those years that I was there, it was based on symptomology and the presence of the disease vector. So there was this mite. We suspected it to be carrying that virus or that disease causing agent. That's by association. So when we see a symptom and we see the mite, we call it rose rosette disease. Since 2012, now we have genetic tools that we are able to go in and take a sample, pull out the genetic material and test it and say, is the virus present or not? And so that's the advancement in terms of science about what we can do about that virus. Now, a little bit more about the story is so now, 2012, we could detect it molecularly. We could study it more about how it spreads and so on. But it also gives us the opportunity to learn more about that virus at that genotypic level. Um, Then we also had to try and understand the epidemiology. How does it spread? Where does it spread? And then are there other roses that are resistant to it? To this day, um, we still make the statement we think that every rose variety that's out there is susceptible. But we also realize that there are some levels of resistance, not immunity, but resistance. We think, or at least we have observed, certain varieties that seem to do better in the presence of or in an area where there's rose rosette disease than some other varieties. So your common varieties that you would see in the landscape that works really well, things like knockout and drift
They
roses,
were devastated.
those are highly susceptible to
Hmm.
rose rosette disease. But there are other varieties that are still, where we have had situations where we picked up a positive, but don't show the symptoms as well. So we have that, and we are currently still studying that. And in fact, I do have a trial up in the Grapevine area.
Your Grapevine,
Um,
yeah, they were
um,
devastated.
yeah,
I mean, that whole area in Grapevine, gorgeous
yeah,
roses. I mean, they had them there for
yeah.
years, and they lost all of them.
Yeah.
I
So if I
mean,
could plug something, I do have a variety trial, a
hmm.
rose rosette variety trial, looking at rose rosette and black spot out in Grapevine. I think if you go to roserosette.org,
Okay.
I don't know if we put that information up there, but those roses out there, I think we got about 62 or 70 roses out there. Each one has a QR code on it.
Hmm.
So if folks are out there and you want to go help us rate it, you can actually take your phone and take a QR code, look at the plant, and give it a rating.
Where's that at in Grapevine?
Um, that's a great question. You know, uh,
Because I'll go.
it's
I'll go.
it's
I will
it's
go there
it's
and rate
out
them.
at a park, and I don't remember the name of the park,
Okay.
but it's
Roses are probably one of my most favorite plants, just because they're crowd pleasers. They bloom. Their bloom cycle is longer than almost anything we got. I mean, they bloom from spring to fall. I mean, they have two really prolific blooms, but they will produce in between. And
yes,
so when I'm dealing with the lady of the house, she almost, I want flowers, flower, I want flower. Well, if I need something that's going to bloom most of the year, that rose is like a winner.
and it depends on the variety.
It does, it
Yeah.
does. And so when that rose rosette got big in that same time frame you were talking about, I had to back away from using those. I did note it, and again, because this mite is microscopic. Like people are
Yes.
like, well, what's it look like? You're not going to see it. It's
Um,
microscopic.
if you know what you're looking for with your naked eye, you could see it
You
wiggling
can
around.
really.
If you know what you're looking
All
for,
right. Well,
but
explain,
but but
educate me.
but it's really tiny. I think what is it about 100 microns in length or so. So it's really
Your eyes
small.
must be better than mine.
Um, no, when I say with the naked eye, you can see it. Basically it looks like little things that are shining back because it's a reflection of the light.
Sure.
But you cannot identify it through that.
Hmm.
Even with a hand lens, you can make the shape out. Maybe you need a microscope to really
Yeah. Yeah,
look
that's
for it.
my understanding is only,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think even the average person out there is not going to know. They may go, oh, there it is.
No, no,
They're not going to see
no.
it.
You're not gonna see it.
No, they're not going
No.
to know. I think they do sometimes, but I tell people that's why I noticed.
It
I know you guys came out with a wind flow as well. Like if there's more wind, like because a lot of people pack their roses in. I'm like,
Yes.
give them some
Yeah.
space
Yeah.
and let the wind because this mite has a tougher time attaching if there's
That
better wind flow or airflow.
that is true, but also keep in mind is this. I like to call this mite. It's like a paratrooper. It'll put out a little balloon and it'll fly off or get
Hmm.
carried by the wind. So by encouraging more wind flow, is hopefully it gets blown away so it doesn't land on it.
Got it.
And that's the deal. The other reason why we said spread out the plants is because the perhaps the more common way that this mite goes from one plant to next is they like to take walks. So if
Hmm.
all the plants are close together, they'll just walk from one plant to the next plant.
Okay, so that makes sense on the
Yeah,
airflow then. Now I understand that. Okay,
yeah,
I thought it was just
yeah,
because it was carrying it and it carried it away, but it's now I understand.
yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot
But
of
you gotta
sense.
worry about the airflow because we had a uh, nursery. It doesn't exist anymore, but they have had rose rosette happen there, and so when they called me up and explained to me, and they said, "Oh yeah, we got rid of all those plants and we're gonna burn it." I said, "No, don't burn it." Uh, and they're like, "Too late." And they say, "Why?" I said, "When you start the fire, you create an updraft because of the hot air.
Hmm.
Well, when the fire is small, those mites are going to start to balloon up and fly away before the flames can actually engulf it.
Oh wow, I
So
didn't know that.
you want to try and at least cover it. If you're going to burn it, you gotta make sure that the mites stay contained. And so what happened with this particular nursery, downstream, downwind of that burn pile, was a swath of roses that had rosette.
Just yeah,
So that's how
death.
that's one way how the mites can spread the disease. And so in terms of the recommendations that we still currently put out in areas where the disease is not high pressure, or even if it is, we said get rid of infected plants. And what that means is bag it up and let it be taken to the landfill. Let it be covered, let it decompose there.
Very good.
So
I guess through the lot. Last question. Let's go over. You're in pathology. You're into diseases. Let's talk about biologics versus synthetic. Let's just talk about those and through the maybe the homeowner's point of view, because we talked a lot with your colleague about
right.
row crops, but to the average homeowner, they don't even know what biologics are. So let's go over that. And do you think that are they making their way into the consumer?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are products that are out there that the homeowner can already purchase. I mean, it's been out there for a while. On the entomological side, probably a lot earlier than on the disease side of things. So what you're referring to as biologicals, or some people might hear biocontrol, biological control. Essentially, what you're doing is finding a living antagonist. So another microbe. This could be sometimes put as a beneficial fungus or beneficial bacterium
Bacteria. Yeah.
that basically will compete against the pathogen. So it's really like taking a good, what you say is the good bug versus the bad bug, and let them duke it out. One thing that people have to remember, because you are using a living agent, for the living agent to be successful, you need to create the environment that is conducive for the living agent, for your antagonist. And I think that's one of the mistakes that folks do, is they put that out and don't, like some of the bacterial stuff, they put it out and they don't water it in, where the instructions would say water it in.
Bacteria is
Why?
going to be activated with water.
Exactly. You need that water. You need that to get those bacteria going. And if you don't do that, you can put the product out. It's just not going to be effective.
So true with a lot of other things as well. Very good.
So, and again, it's not going to work in all cases. What happened with those things is, at some research at some point, somebody actually found a strain or multiple strains of an organism that seemed to do really well against another thing. This is what I would call the new biological warfare.
Yeah.
We're finding fungus fighters among the fungi.
We are. Yep. So. I like it. I think it's pretty interesting. That's very interesting to me. So, again, thank you for your wealth of knowledge, and you've been very welcoming to us here at A&M. So, thank you very much. Appreciate you, Doctor.
You're welcome.
All right.